it will happen. Somebody will see your church sign. Somebody will see something on Facebook. But for somebody that's never heard of your church, that doesn't know anybody at your church, that's a long chasm to kind of bridge, right? And so engaging our people that are going to have these connections with people out in the community. And I just think part of the strategy is just trying to do it and just trying to have a strategy.
This is Breaking Barriers, where we help pastors and churches grow so that they can go. Hey everybody, welcome to the Breaking Barriers podcast. If you've been enjoying the podcast so far, we want to invite you to our conference coming up in September. We know that multiplication, sending, and discipleship is the goal of the church. People generally don't have a problem saying that. But what we have found is that the ultimate input for the output of sending is growth. Many times we get so focused on the output of sending that we forget to put any emphasis at all on the input of growth. And that's why we're here. We want to help shift the narrative towards growing and going, and that's what we'll spend the bulk of our time on at the conference with practical strategies and insights that bring discipleship, sending, and growth back together. Click the link to get your spot, September 17th and 18th. We'll see you there.
Hey guys, welcome to the Breaking Barriers podcast. We have a really special one today, and we actually have a live audience tuning in, and we're going to be talking about how to turn first-time guests into disciples. So I'll go ahead and turn over to Pastor Andrew, and we will jump right in.
Yeah, so if you're new to what we're talking about here, new to the podcast seminar, I think it's good to do a quick, recasting of our vision here. We believe at Mercy Hill and the ministry that we've started called Breaking Barriers that it is the growing churches that can turn into the going churches. So we all know that churches can grow without going. We understand that you can grow a church based on a lot of different things. But if you want to be a reproducing church that plants churches, that does other sending oriented things, missions, man, you have something you want to do in terms of adoption, foster care ministry. You really want to engage your community well. You want to be a sending church. You want to, especially when it comes to church planting, sending out teams that plant other churches. Going churches really are growing churches. And so we've been trying to talk a lot about that around our staff, around our church, around churches that we influence. And I think it really needs to be talked about because we live in a culture where growth seems like it's demonized while sending seems like it's celebrated. We've used a lot of different examples of this, but you can go to a conference nowadays that's got 50 breakouts and not one of them are related to church growth. They're all related to the things that happen because of church growth. So they're awesome things. You could think about, like I said, adoption, sending missionaries, church planting, engaging local schools for the gospel, baptizing teenagers, and I mean, there's a lot of things you could talk about, but it really, those things come on the back of growth.
Right.
I remember I was at a conference where these guys came from all over, we were invited to be in, and it was shocking. It was all these growing churches that are trying to plant churches and all that. And I realized pretty quickly that we had been brought in order to sort of be lectured in anti-church growth principles. You know what I mean? Like, it was sort of like, hey, you invited us in because our churches are growing and planting and all that, but we're here to be lectured on how to not do those things or not do them in the way that we're doing them because, growth is only growth if you do it in the right way, small, missional, disciple, one-on-one, that kind of idea. And so, for whatever reason, and I think practitioners just kind of tell you where we are in culture, professors tell you how we got here. I don't know exactly how we got here, got some ideas, but we're in a place where growth feels kind of icky, and yet sending is celebrated. And the way it's even said sometimes is like, and I've said this, is sending capacity is more important than seating capacity, which is to me is a true statement. I mean, it is in a sense, but to me that's a little bit like saying Easter is more important than Christmas. It's like, well, yeah, but without Christmas, there's no Easter. So for sending capacity, nothing is more important than seating capacity. And so we want to talk about issues and breaking barriers that are affecting the growth side and then spill over into the sending side in a really, hopefully compelling way, and get people to sort of put these things back together where they belong. I think for a long time we've told people, sometimes literally, don't focus on the weekend, focus on discipleship, or focus on don't focus on the weekend, which is ironic because Lifeway has done a research talking about evangelical churches that shows that 70% of evangelical churches are either plateaued or declining. In our particular denomination, sometimes that number is touted at 80%. And I never can get my mind to square those two things, where you look at a denomination that's 80% plateaued or declining, and the message is don't focus on growth. It's like, brother, they got the message.
Right.
Focus on it. So what I want to do is I want to talk about something that is super vital, and Bobby, you're going to jump in and help me with this. We want to talk about something that is vital for the concept of growing in order to go, and that is first-time guests and what to do how to procure
Right.
people coming for the first time, and then how to retain people coming for the first time. The reason I set all this stuff up with growth, and the first thing that I want to say here, I've got 4 or 5 things, and we'll interact on some of this stuff, but I'll go ahead and jump into it, is because there's an ickiness to even talking about first-time guests and numbers and that kind of stuff, which really hampers us in this discussion. And for me, and I think you would agree with this, it really is as simple as, I think people have confused leads and lags. Okay. Bobby, you've done 40X work and that kind of stuff. Maybe you want to just jump in. I've got an example. You can give an example, but what's an example in just generally thinking about lead measure, lag measure? We use that language at Mercy Hill. A lot of businesses use that language. I think we're living in a great state of confusion around leads and lags when it comes to mission. Explain to us what leads and lags are.
So a lead, or a lot of times I like to use the word inputs and outputs. Mm-hmm. The lag is what you are hoping that is going to happen, and so, like in the church world, what we're hoping is going to happen is, life change, baptisms, sending, people being changed from the inside out. Right? Mm-hmm. We don't fully control that. The lead measures are the things that we can do, the things that we can control, the things that God has commanded us to do. So you can't control if someone becomes a Christian, but you can control sharing the gospel, right? The lead measure would be sharing the gospel. The lead measure would be inviting somebody. And so like what you're saying in terms of thinking about like Acts 2 and growing and all this stuff, one of the ways I've been thinking about it in terms of lead measures, lag measures is like, man, Acts 2 is about the crowds, it's about preaching, it's about baptisms, and then the end of Acts 2 is all about discipleship and the church multiplying and all of that, right? We cannot have an emphasis on the end of Acts 2 without the beginning of Acts 2, right? I mean, the crowds are just as important as the disciples, and we were all part of the crowds at one point. And so it's like the strategy, like what we're going to talk about today, has got to include all the lead measures of the things, the things that we're going to do, the preaching, the crowds, the encouraging people to repent, to be baptized, and then also all of the discipleship and multiplication stuff.
Yeah, and man, exactly. And I think that for us, one thing that we're realizing is, man, if there's an ickiness in our soul deep somewhere about leads, we will not do the things that we need to do in order that we would see the lags. Like you said, this is really a seminar. We're going to use it podcast as well, but I don't know how many people there are on there. I mean, there's got to be dozens of people that have jumped onto this, and I bet you many of them are feeling the same ache that we feel around this. What the way it comes out is, I know first-time guests are supposed to be important. I just don't really have a plan, a strategy for procurement, for retention. And here's what's worse. I don't know if I should even verbalize that I want to have a plan for procurement, for retention. Is that icky? Is that too growth oriented? Is it too? And so what we want to do is say, wait a minute, no. If we're going to get the lags that we all want to see, there's so many things. If you just go to like the conference circuit, what you're going to see is every breakout in the world. Adopting kids, diversifying your stage, sending missionaries, planting churches, doing good community ministry, all great stuff. it is the first time guest, and that is the top of the funnel.
Right.
You know, that's where you get in the stream that can bring you down to see some of this really cool sending oriented stuff. Remember, you can grow without going, but you can't go without growing.
The crowds.
Yeah, it starts there. You know, I think for leads and lags, a good way to think about it, inputs, outputs. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I was working on a bench press goal that I had. Okay, and I'm not going to share the goal because I don't want some people to feel bad, all right? And I don't want others to feel like I'm weak. So, because, you know, it couldn't be right either way. So, but it was for me, it was a big goal. It was years long. I'd wanted to do it for a long time.
Did it start with a 3?
I'm not going to get into that. Okay, it did start with a 3 actually, but I'm not going to, thank you for setting me up like that. No, so in other words, in any event, I was just thinking about like, okay, leads and lags. I get with a coach, and it's funny because the things that he wants me to do have very little to do with lay on the bench with as much weight as you can and push it.
All the lead measures.
It's all lead measures. Hey man, how many times are you in the gym? How much back work are you doing? You know, all this kind of stuff. Like he's got 10 different things he wants me to do. You know, and if you, as simple as this, hey man, you might need to gain 5 or 7 pounds. That's a lead. It's like, if you can gain the weight, you'll hit the output. And so I think for us at the very beginning, we have to ask the question for our audience here and people that are going to hear this after, how do you feel about the lead measure of first-time guests, you know? Or are you like, no, we can't talk about that. We only want to talk about the lags. And it's like, well, nothing else in life really works like that. Business doesn't work like that. Health goals don't work like that. Certainly, I don't think church growth works like that. So we've got to settle some of that in our mind. So when we do get some of that settled, you know, in our heart and our soul, and we're like, okay, we want to think about leads so that we can get to lags, and we're not going to feel icky about it. And when people try to put us on blast for it, we're just going to have a bigger backbone and just say, man, whatever. All right, then we can get into some of the practical stuff. And so one of the things I think we have built the church on here at Mercy Hill, and this is not unique to us. I think you see this in the New Testament totally, almost exclusively. And then you got other churches, like we've learned a lot from North Coast Church in California that, you know, man, 40 years, grew from 100 to 10,000. They've seen incredible ministry. And that is, so this is kind of the second principle of today. If anybody's taking notes, the first principle is, we got to get right on leads and lags. The second principle I would say is we got to think about how word of mouth is the best advertising when it comes to first-time guests. I want you to talk some about this, but I'll just kind of introduce the concept here. Most people come to church because they were invited by a friend. Mm-hmm. Now, some of your world is, and I think it's important that we say this, that doesn't mean that SEO and Google reviews and marketing are not important, right? But it is true, I think, that most people are going to go to a church because somebody mentioned it to them or gave that church verbally a good review in their estimation. And so, I think that bears out in the data. We ask people when they are first-time guests, how'd you hear about it? Right. Overwhelming majority is somebody told me, you know. Now, that doesn't mean that the other stuff's not important, and you talk about that, but what do you think about that? Man, you got Google reviews, SEO, marketing. We want to keep working on that stuff. We're trying to get a lot better at that. We don't think we're that good at that right now in terms of just like where we could be for the size of our organization. But it really does come down to word of mouth. Yeah,
100%. I mean, when you think about it, here's how I think about it in terms of word of mouth. One, it's by far the most effective thing. And we said that and we believed that before we ever measured it. But a number of years ago, we started measuring it because we ask people that are first-time guests, and especially around big days, you know, so like Christmas, where we may have over 500 first-time guests, we get some pretty good data about how somebody ended up coming. And I mean, it's probably 90% word of mouth. But another way that I think about it, kind of an additional, maybe going down another layer in terms of word of mouth, when you're thinking of Acts 2, where you're going from crowds to disciples, that word of mouth especially becomes more effective with people maybe that aren't as connected to your church. Because people that have been at your church maybe for 5 years or 10 years and they're super deep in their discipleship, some of those networks of people that they know and that they work with maybe have already been invited by them.
Right.
Which, you know, honestly, people will come after being invited 3 or 4 years ago. So that's not uncommon. But where we see the word of mouth really happening is when you are reaching the crowds, when you do have new people at your church, it's those people that maybe have been around for a couple months or 6 months. They have a network of people that they're able to invite that probably have not been invited to your church yet. And for them, and this is why it's important to think about the crowds and making disciples, because maybe they're not even a believer yet. We have so many times people that are not believers end up being big inviters to our church because maybe they haven't been in church for a long time and they come and they start having a good experience because because at Mercy Hill, we're not just speaking to the disciples, we're speaking to the crowds and the disciples, and we try to design church that way. So these people come and they haven't had a church experience, and now it's a fairly good experience for them after 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And their friends know that they're not a super churchy person. And so when they invite somebody, their friend's like, you know what? If John's inviting me to church, it can't be that bad. I'm going to go check it out,
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that it's important to remember, too, like you threw out a big number. I mean, for some churches, 500 is not a big number. I mean, churches are way bigger than us, right? 500 is a big number in my opinion. There's churches on our college church are going to hear this that, man, they're not going to get... one of the things we talk about is a good goal for first-time guests for a year is about the amount that you have average on a weekend. Okay, so there might be churches that are hearing this that they're shot. I mean, doing really well for them is seeing 150 first-time guests in a year, or 100 if that's their attendance. But the principle is the same. The principle is the exact same. Whether you're talking about hundreds and hundreds or thousands even, or whether you're talking about 1, 5, 10, the principle that you're bringing up is the same, that somebody has shared word of mouth, and now they, if they have a good experience, have an untapped network. Their Lego holes are not all filled up, with people that are already believers. Right. And so they have a chance. One of the things I think that's important to talk about here is how, we try understanding that word of mouth is the best advertising. One thing that has gone on a lot in our church is we've constantly turned some of the focus that we would think about for outside engagement with marketing and all that. And I'm not saying this stuff's wrong and we want to do it, but a lot of times we think, well, the best marketing is a good experience. So if I got 5 hours to spend, do I go spend 5 hours on Facebook ads? Right. I'm not demonizing that. We do that. Or do I spend those 5 hours making sure that the sermon aligns with the music and that there's some really bang up content in the sermon that people are going to, that kind of idea, because people are walking evangelists for things that they know are working for them. One of the examples I use is it's funny when somebody says, you got to see this new movie or you got to see this new show. It's funny to me because I always have and I do that too. I do that to people all the time. But it's funny because you're like, what is it built in a human that you care what show I watch? You liked it. It's like, I don't have an iPhone. Okay, I know you're like an iPhone evangelist. Everybody I know literally, except for my wife and my parents, have iPhones. I'm the only one, I think. But it's funny. Like, people are evangelistic about their phone. And it is funny to me. They're always like, you got to get an iPhone. And I'm like, why do you care what phone I have? And then they start talking to me about green bubbles, or I don't even know what they're talking about, okay? But the concept is humans are going to be evangelistic about things that work for them. So one question is, if word of mouth is the best advertising, then we need to be asking the question, is what we're doing compelling? Right. Are people growing in our services? Because they're going to go out and be the evangelists that God has called them to be, in terms of hopefully go and tell, but also majority of the time it's come and see. Now, one of the things I want to put it, back to you, Bob, because you are kind of over some of the stuff for us. Like, I do see a great connection between the way we think about marketing and this idea of word of mouth. So like when we're thinking about like a Facebook ad, or I'll give you an example. We're doing, one of our big days, we'll talk about big days in a minute, but we're doing the massive Easter egg thing this year. Mm-hmm. I mean, rent the ballpark. I hope we're doing helicopters. I don't know if we are, but we're doing the thousands of eggs and all that. There will be people there that have never heard of anybody. They don't know one soul at Mercy Hill. That's not the majority. Mm-hmm. We even want to do the marketing, the high inviter event. It's still really to help people with their word of mouth, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're basically helping our people to think about inviting, give them ways to invite, give them some creative things maybe to invite people to. But it's all about engaging our people, because they're just going to be the most effective, in terms of, because it's a, it will happen. Somebody will see your church sign. Somebody will see something on Facebook. But for somebody that's never heard of your church, that doesn't know anybody at your church, that's a long chasm to kind of bridge, right? And so engaging our people that are going to have these connections with people out in the community. And I just think part of the strategy is just trying to do it and just trying to have a strategy. I remember a number of years ago, we had somebody that we brought into Mercy Hill that was helping to kind of coach us on stuff. And this is not even why they were here exactly, but I remember we told them about our Easter numbers. Do you remember this? And he basically said,
Sean Lovejoy.
Yeah, he basically said, hey, he's like, I don't know your situation exactly, but he's like, you should be having way more people here on Easter, and he said, well, what are you doing? Like, not just like you do your Easter service, obviously, but what are you doing to like invite people and get your people to invite? And we were like, well, nothing really. We have Easter services and it's important, and we'll talk about evangelism and stuff, but we weren't doing anything like super practically in terms of, hey, here's this year, here's a pre-weekend event that's related to Easter. Here's these inviter cards. Here's this. Here's what we're doing. Hand this out. Put this on your social media. And we did that, and he was just right. Like the amount of people that came that were just newer. I mean, it like doubled.
Yeah.
Just from it wasn't even because we had a great strategy. It just was like having the strategy.
Yeah, I think because we'll move on, but I think because it acknowledges, hey man, our folks are regular everyday disciples who are trying. And so then when they partner up with their church in a way that's a little more unique, shareable content you mentioned, I think vision for upcoming teaching series is a good one. I think another one is engaging events that are designed for people that are a little bit kind of man, I'm not sure I'm going to go on Sunday, but I wouldn't be totally opposed to going to whatever this other thing is. Right. We see that, man, with our student ministry right now. I mean, there's a bunch of students that I know because my kids are in that ministry that are first-time guests that have turned into second-time guests that have turned into now they're in that ministry. They don't come on Sundays. They're not here with their families. My point is, how'd they get involved? There was a fun event. They got involved. They met some people. There's a rhythm of that. Let's talk a lot about that a little bit more. Okay, so here's how we're building it out. I'm a linear guy. All right, this stuff matters because you're never going to go after this the way you need to if you feel icky about it. First-time guests, lead measures. Okay. So word of mouth, best advertising to get the lead. Okay, if that's true, we started getting into this with the egg hunt and all that. What does the church do to specifically, I think some people might think, okay, this is about first-time guests. This is a marketing call about Facebook ads. Actually, it's the opposite. It's a little bit like how does the church designed to empower and really just kind of follow the lead of our folks because we know they're going to be naturally evangelistic about things that are working in their life. So my point in that is big days and who's your one weekends. All right. So if you want to get serious about first-time guests, we've got to have a calendar that has a rhythm of understanding these are strategic high points in the year when we feel like people are going to come. Now, let me riff on this a minute, and then I really want to turn this over to you to get into our strategy for it. But I think that the ickiness thing comes out right here, okay? Because this is where we're getting fully into, in the U.S., in a highly church, post-church, whatever you want to call it, environment. Come and see evangelism is going to be the thing that moves the needle, okay? Now, that we could debate whether that's true of every culture or whatever, but I am going to say this. If you're going to get into big days and equipping your people to invite, and we're going to get into Who's Your One, which people don't know what that is. It's intentional weekends, once a series where people are invited in. They know this is when to invite my lost friend, okay, that has not become to church. The foundation for any of that working is that your people have bought into, and you have bought into, 99% of the people that get saved and stick is going to happen because they heard the preaching of God's word. That the preached word on the weekend is the most important in terms of effectiveness, evangelistic moment that we have. Now, that's very controversial. Okay, I mean, this is like the last 20 years of everybody who had the mic in terms of missiology goes against this. But I would just say emphatically that when you look in the Bible, especially, when you just think about the New Testament, 99%, well, actually, it's probably way more than that. I mean, how can you get more than 99%? I haven't done the numbers. But 99% of the people that we see get saved do so when there's an empowered man preaching the gospel to a crowd. You have, think about the book of Acts, Acts 2, Acts 4, Acts 17. There are one-on-one evangelism moments in the book of Acts, and we know their names, but in the preaching moments, all we know is the numbers because it was thousands. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we've kind of just had to lean into here is we do live in a culture where 99% of the conversation feels like it's aimed around about what is going to be 1% most effective, which is one-on-one evangelism over coffee on a college campus. I love that story. I mean, we need that. We need both, right? The Philippian jailer, the Ethiopian eunuch, like there are stories of that.
Right.
But the 99% is somebody that was either invited in or they happened to be there, and there was a preacher with the word, empowered by the Spirit, and that's what created that moment of conversion and connection in their life. I think that same thing holds true today. Here's the thing. Do our people feel that from us, or do they feel like bringing your lost friend to hear preaching so that what they hear all day long is, you go share the gospel with them. Don't bring them, almost literally, don't bring them here for me to do it.
Right.
You're the missionary in your community. Even though 99% of the time in the book of Acts, what we see is that it's the preaching event that sees that many conversions. Now, if you somewhat get over the ickiness, which that's a big mountain to climb in our culture, okay? But if you just finally get over it, mm-hmm. Now you're opened up to the world of big days and who's your one evangelism. All right. And so I wanted to, let's talk a little bit about that. Bob, talk to us about our big days. Word of mouth's the best advertising. You want to get your friends to hear preaching. That's going to happen rhythmically and cyclically, really, for us. What is big days?
Yeah. Let me just say one thing before, like going on what you said, and then I'll talk about the big days is, we just need a theology of the crowds and a theology of stand up and preach to the crowds. Mm-hmm. Because, you hear it all the time now on podcasts and stuff. People will try, like they know it's kind of right to affirm like the power of the Bible and the power of preaching to change people, but they'll say, yeah, but that, that doesn't really work these days. And I just think of the book of Acts, it's like, well, sometimes Paul did it and got like dragged out of a city. And he wasn't the next time saying, well, standing up and preaching doesn't work. Let me go do something different. Mm-hmm. So I just think you need a theology of the crowds, a theology of stand up and preach to people. In terms of big days, so here is, I don't know if big days is original to us. I think it probably is. At some point we just said, hey, there's going to be certain days where more new people are going to come. And so what we're going to do is try to be more strategic with our staff around those days. So it's kind of like football, right? Like every game is important. You don't want to, right? You never want to lose a weekend. Right. You never want to lose a game. Like they're all important. But it's like if you get to the playoffs or if you get to these certain games, there is a recognition like, hey, we got to really be all in with the plan here because this is a high ROI opportunity that we're going to have. New people come every weekend, but big chunks of them will come on these big days. So for us, what we did is we just went through the calendar and we just tried to identify, okay, is it because of cultural holiday? Is it because our people are excited? I'm not really sure. It's kind of all the above, right? Christmas, our people are excited like crazy, but people in culture are also, there's Christmas music playing. You go to any store. Mm-hmm. It's a real thing that people are just sort of excited about. So we went through the calendar and we just tried to identify, and this will probably change year to year, but probably 4 to 5 big weekends a year that we don't want to just do what we normally do on a weekend. Yeah, we're going to do the same. We're going to do preaching. We're going to do worship. We're going to do all that. So we're not changing God's blueprint for like what a church service looks like, but we're just way more strategic about creating a plan, for social media, for helping our people to invite people, for how we're going to, design the services and, make sure we're all dialed in. A plan leading up to those big days, a plan going out of those big days. And it's basically just a recognition you are going to have some natural momentum around Christmas, around Easter, Maybe we do like a back to school weekend. I mean, I would challenge anybody, go look at your church numbers, and you hit the fall, you hit the end of August, the beginning of September, you have people getting back on a regular schedule. They're not traveling anymore. Their kids are in school. You are naturally going to have an attendance bump. So why not take advantage of those weekends?
Right. Yeah, I think I don't know if he called them big days. That part, I don't know. But that Rich Birch was really the one that kind of got us thinking about that a few years ago. And he mentions Mother's Day. I think one thing that we've kind of landed on as a big day is like, man, whatever weekend follows Vacation Bible School.
Right.
If you leverage it and you don't let Vacation Bible School end on Friday, but you tell the kids, hey, the whole culmination of everything you're going to do this week happens on Sunday, Right. So there's other big days that almost feel like they can be a little bit manufactured, in terms of just like what we're trying to do. But yeah, I love the idea of culture. For whatever reason, there may come a day where these things don't matter anymore, but right now that ain't it. Everybody knows the week after Labor Day is going to be huge. That's going to be a big day for them. Now, that might be meaning that their church normally runs 80 and they run 100 that week, or they run 1,000 and they jump to 1,500. It's like there's a cultural sort of, so what are we doing we want to start a new sermon series that day, if at all possible, to try to get, hey, you're already one down, come back for the next 4 or 5 weeks. That kind of idea. We want to be really on top of our game. Maybe you change up your first time guest gift that week. Maybe you go gift card or something instead of a mug, or there's a lot of things you can do there. But now, Who's Your One? I'll just mention this because we need to move on for the sake of time. Who's Your One is not tied to the big day.
Right.
It's a different thing. We've learned this from the Church of 1122, who is masterful in this. And we try to have one. Now, we preach the gospel every single week, and we try to give people an opportunity to get saved every single week in the service. We don't do a come forward or something like that, but just, they can pray right there. But one of the things that we try to do is like, wait, there needs to be at least one opportunity in a series. Our series are normally 6 to 8 weeks, 10 weeks, something like that. And we try to say, hey, at least for one of these weeks, there is a straight up gospel, you need to get saved, call for salvation, hand raised, fill out this card. It's going to be a shorter message, probably a 30-minute message. It's just that whole weekend is sort of dedicated to evangelism. Mm-hmm. And then we try to signal to our people beforehand, hey, this is an opportunity for you to bring your lost friends. Most of them are going to be first-time guests to the church. So that's another opportunity. They're wanting to do word of mouth, so let's help them. Big days and Who's Your One. Now, one of the things, too, this is a little debatable how different churches do it, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. We have decided that we feel like it's very important. Okay, so third thing was big days, Who's Your One? Fourth thing is identifying first-time guests on the weekend. There are churches I trust and really love that don't do this, okay? We do it. Man, we want to have the biggest tent. We want to make sure, we want to identify and call people to first-time guests, tent, get your gift, fill out your card, check people against the database in terms of, man, they check their kids in, we have no record of them. They're all tools for us to have another touch with a new person. And, we want to try to signal that. I mean, in our services, we want our people to know when somebody is new and you bring them, take them to the tent. Make sure that their kids get checked in so that we have record of them. We do all that stuff. We don't have to spend a ton of time on this. This is a little bit of just marketing 101, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we just feel like that person has shown up. They are a hot lead. God's doing something in their life, and we don't want to squander that opportunity. So if people are coming, again, this could be church of 100, church of 1,000, church of 10,000, man, what are we doing to try to identify them, capture contact information so that we can have another touch?
Yeah, I mean, it really goes back to one, don't demonize marketing. I mean, I hear people do this all the time. It's the, businessification of the church, and it's so awful, it's so bad. Marketing is nothing more than creative communication to get somebody to engage, to get somebody to go deeper, and to get somebody to eventually be an ambassador for what we're doing. That's what marketing is, period. And my thing is, and I try to tell our team this, and we have a long way to go in this, like heaven forbid that a first-time guest comes to an Easter service or another big day, and we don't have a good strategy to follow up with them after that, My thing is like, man, why should Carvana or Rocket Mortgage have a better follow-up strategy than we have? Because Christianity is communication at the very core, right? I mean, we're trying to communicate a life-changing truth to people, trying to get them to grow and go deeper on that, and then ultimately become an ambassador for that. And so we need a very creative way to communicate with people around these different big days and after these big days. Because a lot of churches, and this is how we were, somebody would come and maybe you have a first-time guest tent, you say thanks for coming, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, you literally never communicate with them again. And if any of us think about, we are all on all these different email lists of companies and businesses or nonprofits we've engaged with. Sometimes it just takes a lot of communication for somebody to take a next step, And we can't, this is what happens when people demonize church growth, like you just end up, you demonize the crowds, you demonize people taking steps, and you just say, well, people should, they should just buy in or go deeper or whatever. And instead of like, hey, man, let's not demonize any of the steps for anybody. And it's going to be a slow process for some people. And let's design communication around that. Like one very specific example for our Christmas services. This year specifically, we said, hey, we want to have like a 7-day communication thing with people after they come to a Christmas service, like every day for 7 days, to try to give them an opportunity to come back, to give them, hey, man, man, that was good. I need to go try that again, and stay in front of them in terms of the communication. And that's all marketing is. I mean, a lot of churches, they're like, well, we don't want to be business. We don't want to be corporate. Therefore, we're not going to do email campaigns. And it's like, well, I think it's a little bit of a cop-out.
Yeah, and man, if somebody's listening to this and they're brand new to this, and they're starting to have a little bit of a turn in the way they're thinking about some of this stuff, they can direct message us whenever. And we have, because there's a lot of places that if you're like, man, I'm a pastor that just me,
right,
100 people, like what am I? Okay, that's not an excuse not to follow up. Maybe you need to outsource some of this stuff, and we can help get people connected to some of those things. I think that can help them. With that. So let's talk about, all right, so we're communicating, man, okay, they've come, we're now, trying to communicate with them. We're trying to see them take next steps. One of the things I think is really important is that we buy into, this is the, what am I on 4 here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We buy into the idea of trying hard to close the back door, with people. And, this is a fruit thing. God controls this.
Right.
People come, they engage, they either buy in or they don't. God controls ultimately what happens. Totally understand that. We get to control what we're trying to do. And what we're trying to do is see them go from first-time guest to second-time guest. I've had this speech I've done with our campus pastors a lot where it's like, hey guys, what are we trying to do? See people come for the first time, come back for the second time. And then maybe start getting into some relationships, serve team, all that, group, all that. One of the ways that we try very hard to close the back door is those email communications, the things you're talking about. We are not trying to simply thank them that they came. We're trying to cast a vision for what God wants to do in their life.
Trying to persuade them.
Yeah, with a vision.
Right.
So I think a lot of times what we're doing is we're thanking them that they got in the car one time. And what we need to be doing is painting a very good picture of where the car is going. Where is the car heading? So front door, back door. How do we close the back door? We close the back door with God's vision for your life, and we do that through an event called the Weekender. I think about, our origin story with Weekender. Maybe we can do future stuff around Weekender. But the Weekender is basically something that was born out of a talk I heard from a local pastor here who really helped us a lot when we were getting going. And he was influenced greatly by the Church of the Highlands. And the Church of the Highlands does a thing called Growth Track. A lot of people, I'm shocked, in our stream don't even know who the Church of the Highlands is. they're going to have 100,000 on Easter this year. Okay. We don't know who they are, 20 campuses or whatever throughout Alabama. But anyway, they do something called the growth track. Very simple. Side note. I talked earlier about that conference I went to where we got there and we realized, this is about demonizing everything they do. A decent chunk of that conversation I had with some of those guys was demonizing the growth track, what the Highlands does. So I'm looking at it. I mean, sometimes you just want to pull your hair out. You're just like, man, I can't. But anyway, their big question is, what are you trying to get people to do? They come to your church. What vision are you casting for them? They do something called the growth track. We couldn't do that because of space issues. Boom, Weekender is born. We get everybody together 8 years ago and we say, hey, people are coming. But as a church planter or a pastor, I need to be waking up. This is the phrase that kind of caught me. I need to be waking up every single day thinking, how do I get people further plugged into what we're doing? Not just that they came one time. Mm-hmm. I mean, how do we assimilate them? I know that's a bad word now, but how do we, there's technically the definition of how do we get them into our thing and get them acting in a way the disciple acts and see God do something in their life and just the whole deal, right? And so Weekender was born. It was an event that we started years ago. We've put hundreds of people through it every single year. And the idea is, man, we come together. It's not just a first steps class with used to we did pizza in a 30-minute class. And now it's kind of a whole thing. We try to say, man, it's the best. We want to make it the best, one of the best nights of your year, spend a lot of money on it. We want to wow people with their experience. But the whole idea is that you bring them to a spiritual moment of opening their hands and saying, God, we want to take steps forward in the vision of this church. You want to talk a little bit about Weekender? And then we need to kind of start wrapping up.
Yeah, so some key kind of core principles for Weekender. One is, like, when somebody comes to Mercy Hill on the weekend specifically, and, even more specifically around these big days, we don't offer people 20 different things that they can do. Like sometimes you imagine a church where you go in and you grab a bulletin, maybe you're new, and you see all the stuff the church is doing. You have no idea what you should be doing and how that applies to you or what your next step is. So we stand up on the stage every week and we try to announce it every week. So it's one of those things that is in every single service. I would say 95% of them. Mm-hmm. We say, if you are newer or if you have been around Mercy Hill even for a couple years and you've not done this, this is your big front door to connect to Mercy Hill. This is how you learn more about us. This is how you meet some of our staff. And this is how you plug in and use the gifts God has given you here. So that's one way. We make it very simple. There's not 10 different ways to connect. There's one way to connect. The second thing is we try to make the event really excellent. You kind of mentioned this. If we really challenge ourselves to think about it, like in a business, they would think about this as like customer retention, marketing, whatever. It took a long time to get somebody in your organization where they're to the point where they're self-identifying and they're saying, I want to know more. I want to connect on a deeper level. So, if you're going to take that and just go pizza and paper plates and you send a couple volunteers to lead this thing, it's like, what are you doing? I understand that maybe we don't think all that critically about it, but it's like, hey, these are like the warmest leads of people raising their hand and saying, I want to be discipled. I want to go deeper. I want to whatever, Mm-hmm. And a lot of times these people are actually on the very beginning of their spiritual journey. Mm-hmm. Like they know God's doing something in their life. And so they know they should take a next step. So when you say, hey, this is the big front door to connect. So this just got to be a really, really, really big deal, really high level staff involvement, put a lot of budget towards this. And then the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it back over to you, is we try to not convolute it with giving them like 20 next steps coming out of the Weekender. And we have done that in the past, and this is how a lot of churches do it, where it's like, hey, we're going to give you all of our theology, and we're going to give you everything we want you to do at the church. And and we do mention like, hey, theological beliefs, and here's our flywheel of how to grow and connect. But coming out of the Weekender, it's just like some simple next steps. Right. Like for us, it's just, man, try out serving on the weekend. Right. And we know that's not the end all be all, but we also know, hey, if we can get these people more regularly attending church, and if we can get them in some relationships, and we can get them to feel what it feels like to use their gifts, it's going to make them much more likely to take additional steps. Right.
Because, and I think one of the reasons we've identified serving on the weekend as that step for them, as opposed to just groups or mission trip or something, is because serving on the weekend is the starting place for what God wants to do in terms of your Christian service. I mean, it's just the most low-hanging. A lot of churches look at serving on the weekend as the end, as the finish line. It's the starting line,
right?
And then we get to see people use their gifts and all that. All right, hey, 2 minutes, man, 2 minutes. Let's put all this together because we got a pretty big weekend coming up. People could be hearing this, years from now, but if you're hearing it in the moment, people that are online right now listening,
we're always going to be 3 or 4 months away from a big day.
Yeah, that's true. So, the one we have coming is Easter.
Right.
But you're right. So how do you put all this stuff together? I mean, if you think about, okay, we're not going to feel icky about first-time guests. We know our people are doing word of mouth. We want to empower them for that through big days. And okay, people are going to then come. How do we catch them and what do we do with them afterward? And then boom, what's my version of the weekender? What's my version of what I'm asking them to do? How do we capitalize that on what is, I have heard people say Christmas is the new Easter, which I kind of think is true a little bit in the church world, but the biggest day, or maybe now the second biggest day for Christian outreach, how do we put it together?
Yeah, so I think first, you want to be hyper clear 2 or 3 months early. How many services do we need? What extra events are we going to do? We need to be hyper clear around that, and we need to figure that out somewhat because of how many people we think are going to come. We may need to launch new services. We may not just need to accept. We may need to prepare the jars and do something unique and have some extra off-time services to fit everybody. From there, we start communicating with our people around all of this, all the events, the inviter stuff, encouraging them to invite. And at the same time, we're hopefully communicating outside of the church. Mm-hmm. So make sure your website's updated. Make sure any other communication is updated. Make sure stuff on social media, giving your people stuff to share. Make sure Facebook, all the times, there's an Easter page where somebody can click and they could see everything about your Easter services. And then you really just start kind of the marketing communication game where you're really just all you're trying to do is be super strategic about how you're communicating. Mm-hmm. And so leading up to a season like that, you don't want to convolute it with a bunch of other stuff that you're communicating. You want to be hyper-focused on, this is an extremely important weekend we have coming up. And so people feel it. People just feel it. They feel it from you. They feel it on stage. They feel it from announcements. We print thousands of inviter cards and give it to people. The culture of all that just gets into our people. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards, we just want to think about, okay, engage people really well at these services and then be just crazy strategic in following up with them afterwards. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the all-encompassing. You probably need to start 3 months before, this weekend, and then you need to probably have a couple-month communication plan afterwards. So it's really almost like a 6-month deal anytime you do a big weekend like this.
Yeah, I mean, I worked at the Summit Church for a long time, and before we moved here to Plant Mercy Hill, and the first year I was there, it shocked me that the first meeting we would have after we got back from Christmas break was about Easter. And that's some of those backstage conversations that we're trying to bring to the front stage.
Right.
It's like, man, a lot of these churches that you see that are having incredible success with growth, there's a reason. I mean, yes, God is moving, but they are preparing the heck out of the jars, starting to talk about Easter in January, Now, I will say this as we close. Somebody might be hearing this right now, especially in our live audience, that might be like, man, I haven't thought about it at all. I mean, this is all new to me. We have a small church, whatever. Okay. All right. You got a month. All right. In that month, I would say unequivocal, add some service. Add a service, because that, if nothing else, that will kick your pants into, oh my, we got to fill it. Okay, that's part of what I think is the magic of church planning is like, man, backs against the wall. Okay, so if I was just coaching somebody, I'd be like, man, add a Saturday night service, add a Sunday night service, use it as a rallying point for your people to move them missionally. Hey, don't come on Sunday morning, go to that one to help people. I would have inviter cards in the seats for the next 3 or 4 weeks leading up to Easter. That'd be one thing I would think about in terms of just trying to get the culture of inviting, and man, this is come and see. And there's a few times during the year that the church partners organizationally with the organism of everybody going out. We know you want your friends to get saved, help them talk about that. There's other things you could do. If I was just given 3-step, I'd start a service. I'd be talking about inviting starting next week. And then the third thing I would do is, even if you don't have a solid weekender, first steps, whatever, I would plan something for all of the, whether it's 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out, and I would announce that on Easter. hey, if you're newer, or I don't care if your church is 50 people, 100, 5,000, okay? What are you announcing as a next step for them in further connecting with their church? You have something to say?
Let me say this as I think just a really good example. It just made me think about it. So I had the chance to go preach at one of our church plants. Shout out to them, Gateway Church in Waynesville, North Carolina. And I was there this past weekend, and they're less than 100 people. And they did everything that you're talking about doing. So it's not we got to have all these crazy resources. You know, their lead pastor, Pastor Brody, he stood up at the end of the service and gave the most impassioned plea for people to be praying for Easter, thinking about Easter. They're doing a big sort of way of the cross the day before Easter to try to engage people. They're doing a whole prayer and fasting plan leading up to Easter. It's one of their big goals for the year. And so you just imagine there are people that are sitting there, all of the stuff, all of the plea to, hey, Easter's a big deal. Here's what we're doing. And so I'm sure his people are going to be catching the vision of that. Like, it's not all of that I just described doesn't even cost any money. You know, it's just emphasizing it.
I love that, man. That's a great way to end. We can't control what God's going to do. We get to control what we're going to try to do. And so just having some intentionality around this stuff. All right. We want to thank our people on our live audience. And man, this is it. If you haven't followed us yet, follow Breaking Barriers Podcast. And that's it.
Awesome.